Well, hello, everybody. I'm going to prattle on for a minute while folks come in. I'm trying something new where I'm putting QR codes on my reference material, so if you want to real-time fact check me and be that person, then I'll save you the effort of having to type. Everybody good? In? Great. Well, welcome to Mike Lee Gives Us All a Reason to Drink 2017. Well, if you know me, you know that my talks are, they sort of come with existential angst, the way that a roller coaster comes with screams. But with this talk in particular, I do need to give you some real warnings about the content, because we're going to talk about some nasty, nasty stuff today. This presentation necessarily and unfortunately contains depictions or descriptions of pornography, abuse, including of children and animals, the killing of animals, racist violence, politics, and of course, the annihilation of everything we hold dear. And I might swear a little. So to give you a minute to walk out, if that's what you'd like to do, I'm going to recommend some of my previous talks, which are not really prerequisites, but in them I go into some sort of additional details into some of the ideas that I am calling back to here. First of all, Ethics Made Easy, which is a talk I gave here a few years ago, which just tells you about ethics, how they work, what they are, why they're important in business and software, and in particular, the nature of informed consent as the root of all ethics. And in that vein, I'm going to tell the 4 or 5 of you who just walked in that this is going to be a really nasty presentation. So if you're not in the mood to leave here depressed and angry, then you should go. The next talk is my talk, World Modeling, which it describes in stark mathematical terms the steps that we had to have taken in order to have maintained our civilization and what's probably going to happen to us since we didn't. And then Know the World and Make It Better, which I think is probably the best talk I've ever given. So, on Saturday, Tim Cook said, "Violence and racism have no place in America." And many echoed that same sentiment, saying essentially, this is not who we are. Now, I believe what he meant to say is that violence and racism should have no place in America, and this is not who we should be, but unfortunately, this is who we are. Violence and racism do have a place in America. They always have. This talk is about that, the fact that our civilization was born in an orgy of violence, what we would now call racism, and environmental destruction, which started in 1492 and which continues to this day. In the coming years, when we have lost everything for nothing, when the living envy the dead, and when we find ourselves crying to the heavens, why? This talk explains why. So I am a full-time engineer who left my dream job at Apple to travel the world, to learn from those experiences and to share those experiences. Most of my talks now are connected in some way to the things that I've learned. Today's talk was inspired by something I keep having to explain to would-be entrepreneurs who want venture capital for their pet projects. People do not realize that taking funding makes you a startup, and that being a startup, well, let me put it this way. Startups are not pets. Startups are animals raised for the slaughter. If you want to have a long-term sustainable company, you do not want to be a startup. A startup is expected to grow as much as possible, as quickly as possible, so they can be sold for a profit, either to another company via acquisition or to the public via IPO. But today's talk is not about startups per se, but rather the disease that startups carry and that will eventually kill every startup or any other thing that stays focused on growth as a goal. This is growth the destroyer. My thesis is as follows. Growth is a side effect of doing good work. It is a problem to be managed. It is not a goal in and of itself. Prioritizing growth risks diluting or destroying success factors that may not be fully understood. By extension, there is a good size for everything. Too small and you can't survive, but too big and it can actually get a lot worse. Here's a really simple example. I'll often find a really good restaurant that has, excellent food, great service, reasonable prices, but not very many customers. And I'm always worried that such a place is going to go out of business. But then sometimes, they do good work and word gets out, they get some good reviews, maybe I leave them some good reviews, they start advertising, maybe they get better signage, and before you know it, I have the opposite problem. I can't get into that restaurant anymore. I can't even get a seat. And even if I could get a seat, the food isn't good anymore, the service is lousy, and the price is irrelevant because the entire experience has been ruined. I think that's the most obvious way that focusing on growth can destroy your business is by destroying the experience. But it's hardly the only way. Growing too fast, too quickly will also destroy your culture. Now, I need to stop for a minute here. I need to be careful because, last year my talk inspired somebody to vote for Trump, and I don't want to do that kind of thing again. So I want to make myself clear. It kind of sounds like I'm talking about immigration, but I'm really not, because immigrants as a group are entirely too small to have this kind of effect unless you ghettoize them, in which case you could certainly destroy a neighborhood. But that's a management problem, not an immigrant problem. No, but where I have seen this kind of flooding, where the original inhabitants were drowned in a sea of newcomers, is Apple. Yes, you are the immigrants. Surprise. When iPhone happened, I was already well established as a Mac developer, and I gotta tell you, you would not believe how great things were before you got here. Nevertheless, when you came, I welcomed you. 360 was the first iPhone conference, and I gave the opening keynote, which was called Welcome to the Neighborhood. I still welcome you. I don't blame you for the fact that everything changed so quickly the culture was destroyed. I blame Apple. Apple remained focused on growth until they became the largest company on earth, and being that big just brings problems. Like this. This doesn't happen when you only have 3% market share. Which doesn't sound like much, but I gotta tell you, it was the 3% of people who actually pay good money for great software, and it was a pretty lucrative time. But when iPhone made Apple successful, they chose that success itself over the thing that really made them successful, which was the soul of the company, the people. And I don't just mean the people inside the company, I mean all of us. Let me take you back to the good old days and sort of tell you the story from my perspective. For me, it all begins at WWDC. This used to be the place where all the Apple developers could get together, get to know each other, work out our differences, and actually meet the people who built the platform that we were all on. There weren't many new people, so when you'd run across some weird thing like Objective-C and you'd think, well, this is stupid, you were surrounded by people who could explain, actually, no, it's a cool, beautiful language, thus transmitting the culture. But now WWDC, it's just a sampling of people, most of whom are new. So when one of the weird little things that makes Apple Apple comes along, the lone voice of experience is drowned out by the sea of newcomers. That's certainly true outside of the company, and it must surely be true inside the company. I've heard as much as 85% of Apple employees now were hired after Steve died. But it's not just the new people, the old-timers changed as well. There used to be a kind of humility at Apple because they had lost the desktop war. But iPhone immediately replaced that with a kind of retroactive arrogance caused by this very dangerous feeling of vindication, that we were right all along, and after 30 years, the rest of the world finally caught up. Even before the App Store opened, I already saw Apple turning against some of their best developers. Suddenly their attitude was, we don't need you, you need us. That was the same attitude with which the big brands abandoned Apple in the 90s, which was what forced Apple to appeal to the crazy ones, to build this ecosystem of indie developers. It was this symbiosis between the platform and its developers that was Apple's secret weapon. We indies didn't care about Windows. We only cared about the Mac. So when Apple released new technology, we immediately adopted it. We immediately brought it out to our users because whatever we could do that Windows could not do was our competitive advantage. Soon the tables were turned, and instead of the software you want doesn't run on Mac, it became all the good software only runs on Mac. And people began to switch. This was the success that brought Apple back from the brink and eventually enabled iPhone. Apple also needed to switch from encouraging growth to managing growth, but they failed to recognize this and instead remained firmly focused on growth as the goal. When the big brands came crawling back, Apple not only welcomed them, but favored them in decision after decision. Big brand has millions of users. Indie has thousands. No brainer. Inevitably, the indies went out of business and the corporates took over. We used to work for small companies focused exclusively on Apple, but now we work for large companies that service multiple platforms. Big brands don't care about Apple. They care about their own customers. So when Apple comes out with new stuff, we have to say, thanks, but no thanks. We can't adopt this until it's on all the platforms. This is what should be making Tim Cook frown, because this is Apple losing their competitive advantage and turning into Microsoft, a company of people made rich on stock, out of touch with common people, and unable to get their innovations adopted because they're just too big. Yes, Apple is making a lot of money, but so was Microsoft. When they were their most successful, they were already doomed. But what is frustrating is that so was Apple. This already happened once. They got a second chance. They almost died, and they got a second chance, and it just seems like they've made the same mistakes again. Except this time, Steve isn't coming back for Act 3. And now I would like to counterbalance all of that negativity with something nice about Apple, which is this. I would not be here. I would not be a professional. I would not be anything if it weren't for Apple, and I would not know you if it were not for iPhone. And I am so grateful. But it doesn't change the fact that our culture was destroyed. Focusing on growth destroys your culture. It also destroys the economy. Certainly, we've seen this with the app economy, but there actually are bigger things in the world than Apple. They're a powerful organization. They have a great marketing department, but they're not the most powerful organization, and they don't have the best marketing department. That honor goes to the US military security complex. Think about it. They spent billions of dollars building a constellation of satellites so that they can know exactly where everyone is, what we're talking about, and what our friends are doing. And instead of protesting, we line up to buy the tracking devices. If the military had said, this is the information age. Information is an asset as well as a weapon. Therefore, libraries and printing presses will be phased out. You will instead receive revocable access to approved information on military infrastructure. We might have done things differently. Instead, we say, who needs books when we have the internet? Why do we still have conferences? Instead, we put all of our faith in a piece of technology that will almost certainly be taken away from us. Do you think when all the stores are finally closed, we'll still be able to get those great deals online? I guarantee you we will not, for one simple reason. We are in the second dot-com bubble, and it is about to burst. Why? Because just like the first dot-com bubble, it's built on artificially and unsustainably low shipping costs. The first time it was funded by investors. This time it's funded by the shipping companies themselves. This story comes from an 8-part documentary called Containers that was excerpted by the excellent podcast 99% Invisible. Briefly, This is the Maersk EE class container ship, introduced in 2011. EE stands for economy of scale, energy efficient, and environmentally improved. The idea here is the bigger the ship, the more containers, the cheaper the shipping. This ship set off an arms race between shipping companies to build bigger and bigger ships. That in turn led to a massive oversupply of shipping capacity, causing prices to plummet to an all-time low. Well, now, of course, competition driving down prices sounds like textbook capitalism, and it is, especially the part where it runs rampant and ruins everything. The shipping industry is currently losing about $8 billion a year. That's why Hanjin went bankrupt. And that's why the entire industry is about to collapse. And when that happens, it's going to be pets.com all over again, because once you have to pay the real cost of shipping, it's not cheaper anymore. Except this time, we've dismantled the infrastructure. So when the virtual world once again fails us, we're going to be confronted with the reality of our neglect. This is why I firmly believe that the internet in general and all technology must augment but never replace the real world. Look, the internet is great, but we need to use it the right way, not to distract ourselves, but to prepare. In the coming years, we are going to need real skills in things like food, water, power, waste management, and medicine. We are also going to need real tools that we can repair and maintain ourselves. Right now, the internet and the economy makes this cheap and easy. We need to be taking as much advantage of that as we can, while we can. Focusing on growth will destroy the economy, but it can also destroy your reputation. Here's a story a farmer once told me about what we might call growth hacking. A certain hog farmer, when it came time to take the pigs to slaughter, would drive down to the bakery outlet and fill his pickup truck with expired fruit pies. Now, if you don't know what a fruit pie is, it's basically just sugar and thickening agent. And he would feed this to the pigs, and it was literally the best thing the pigs had ever or would ever eat. And so, being pigs, they ate as much of it as they possibly could, which meant that when those pigs got on the scale at the slaughterhouse, they were a little bit heavier than they actually were, which my friend thought was very clever. After all of that, extra pig shit is going to add up. But it reminds me too much of something that happened when I was a kid, when I discovered that I could put 49 pennies in a roll instead of 50, and nobody could tell the difference, and all those pennies are going to add up. And I told my dad this, thinking I was so clever, and he looked at me and said, "But what is your honor worth? What is your reputation worth? Because you're screwing up the whole system, somebody's going to figure this out, then no one's going to want to do business with you, and then what?" Cheating might make you appear successful, but eventually people will realize you're full of shit. Which brings me to Twitter. Now, the problems here I'm about to talk about are not unique to Twitter. This problem exists to some extent on every social network, but I've been on Twitter for 10 years. It's my social network of choice, and I've seen it change from this way that we nerds use to keep in touch with our friends to something entirely different. Specifically today, I want to focus on my obsession with fake people on Twitter, so-called bots. So DM Elms had a really insightful thread. I recommend checking out this whole thread, relating Twitter's population of racists and abusive men to Twitter's desire to artificially inflate their user numbers. Exactly the kind of pig shit growth hacking I'm talking about. According to a study by the, I'm sorry, I'm making mouth noises, it's horrifying. I hate it when people do that. According to a study by the University of Southern California, 9 to 15% of Twitter's 319 million active users are actually bots. That's like 48 million accounts. So when you buy followers or likes or retweets, what you're getting are either bots or fake accounts that are created and managed by armies of people in computing centers in developing countries, which are called cyborgs. So what do these bots do? Well, according to the Atlantic Council, in their study on Russian interference in German politics, they say that mostly what the bots do is they amplify the signal of a relatively small group of people. The Kremlin has propaganda accounts, not many people follow them. There are a few people who are amplifying that, but there's just a few of them. But because they have an army of bots, it seems like this is a much bigger topic than it actually is. But it also works in reverse, with thousands of fake people shouting down anyone that they disagree with, or flooding hashtags with disinformation, or other forms of targeted harassment known collectively as mobbing. Twitter likes to trot out concepts like free speech as if there's some great democratizing force, but the fundamental principle of democracy is one person, one vote. Allowing people to use bots in this way makes democracy impossible. So you gotta think Trump is probably on this train, right? Got a lot of bots? Well, you wouldn't be wrong. Trump certainly has a lot of fake followers. In fact, here's a Huffington Post story about that exact thing. But don't be misled, because maybe some of this is on purpose, but there's something much deeper going on here. This article also notes that lots of big famous accounts have lots of fake followers. In my experience, any account with more than 100,000 followers has a very large percentage of fakes. And the bigger you get, the more fake followers you get, whether you want them or not. It doesn't necessarily have anything to do with Trump. Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, Justin Bieber, they also have a lot of fake accounts. Here's USA Today reporting the exact same thing in 2012, except this time it's Barack Obama, Mitt Romney, and Lady Gaga. So I have a theory about this. Something you have to understand about bots is that they follow real people, but real people don't typically follow them. So their followers are mostly just other bots controlled by the same people. So what you notice is that the pro-Trump, the pro-Obama, the pro-Clinton, the pro-Bieber accounts, they're really the same people. Now the services these bots provide make sense, right? Fake followers, fake retweets, fake likes, amplification mobbing, and of course spam. But the content that they interact with is what really confused me. I was really scratching my head for the longest time. What I've noticed is that these bots mostly peddle in politics, as mentioned, controversial cultural things like gun control, celebrity gossip, sports, cute pictures of babies, puppies, and kittens, and of course, pictures of naked people. It must all be related, but how? And that was when I realized, my God, it's full of porn. Because the breakthrough is in realizing that this is all porn. Not just sex porn, but cute porn and outrage porn. It doesn't really matter if you're pro-Trump or pro-Clinton or pro-Obama. What matters is that you're angry. Because what is porn? When you really get down to it, porn is information that stimulates a neural pathway we evolved to handle some physical phenomena. We're interested in sex because we have to perpetuate our species. We like cute stuff because we have to care for our children. And we get angry because we have to protect ourselves and our families. Now, when a chemical does this, we call that a drug. But when information does this, we call it porn. So what's the problem? Well, to go back to the pig shit analogy, for one thing, it's just empty calories. I mean, even if it's not bad for you, it's not exactly good for you either. But there are other problems too, because the growth issue also affects demand for pornography, and demand for content inexorably leads to abuse. Demand for cute pictures leads to posing dead or drugged animals. Demand for outrageous news has destroyed our ability to reach common ground with our fellow humans at this most crucial time. And demand for sexual imagery leads to unethical pornography. Now, to me, that is anything posted without consent, including revenge porn, as well as things or people who cannot consent, such as children or animals. Now, obviously, most of that stuff is illegal and therefore against the rules of service. Obviously, if you find illegal content, Twitter will take it down. But here is the crux of my argument. Because Twitter is focused primarily on growth, the rules don't actually matter. You see, in order to preserve what they have, Twitter has to have a mechanism whereby you can report offending accounts so they can be removed. But on the other hand, to encourage growth, Twitter makes it as fast and easy as possible to create new accounts. The ratio of the time it takes to remove an account versus the time it takes to create an account tells you which one wins. In my experience, even a flagrant violation of the rules takes about 24 to 48 hours to take down. Creating an account takes basically no time at all. And so what this creates is a kind of float where the rules don't matter. So what you see is, one, people flagrantly break the rules. You're not allowed to have sexually explicit avatars. I censored this because I don't think this woman actually gave consent to have her picture used by these spammers. You don't have to look for this stuff. This is the hashtag at a conference I went to. First two hits are from the same bot network. One of them has sexually explicit imagery, which is a clear violation of Twitter's terms of service. But it doesn't matter. They don't seem to care. It's not like people are hiding the fact that they're making these fake accounts. It's not like you can't look at a list of these people and see what's going on. And they also explicitly link their accounts. You can see this is a child pornography site that is clearly indicating that this will be taken down and then the next will follow a series. And now, okay, computers are dumb and it take a lot of people to look at this stuff and spend half a second of their time figuring it out. But this is a graph of what a bot account looks like. It's posting 100 tweets per minute over the course of like 10 minutes. Normal people don't do that. The practical result of this is that Twitter, unfortunately, is a massive platform for spam, illegal pornography, and all kinds of abuse. Except weirdly for copyright abuse. Twitter is awesome at keeping copyrighted content off of their servers. Now, some say that this is a statement of their priorities, and it might well be. But I think it is only fair to acknowledge the fact that dealing with a subset of known content is a much easier problem than dealing with a vague and general category of illegal content. It seems to me that what Twitter really needs to do here is require proof of consent for any account posting pictures of another human being naked. But they simply don't do that. I have to assume that's because they know that people love porn, legal or not, and their goal is not to be moral. Their goal is to keep us addicted so they can continue to grow like pigs. This is the slide where I was going to say something nice about it. It was there. I had a whole thing. But then I noticed, as I was getting ready for this, that an account that I had reported a week ago was still active. I don't know what the fucking controversy is here. We don't even have to ask if this is moral. We only have to ask, is this contributing anything worthwhile? Is this making a better experience for customers? I really don't think it is. And that alone will eventually destroy this company. I am so angry at Twitter, but I am also deeply ashamed of myself. We enable this. James Baldwin said that sometimes being innocent is itself the crime. I have spent 10 years of my life giving these assholes free content and giving my friends and relatives reason to keep coming back. Twitter is like climate change. It is an ongoing crime against humanity that we are all guilty of contributing to just by leading our everyday lives. Focusing on growth will destroy your reputation, if not your very soul. And it destroys our future. Let me show you the cost of our innocence in black and white. This is from World 3. I talk about this extensively in my world modeling talk. It's a model that's verified accurate with 45 years of data. The blue line is the screwed we were in 1972 when this was published, and the red line is basically us saying, hold my beer. You see, after the Great Depression, we switched our dominant economic model to Keynes, which emphasizes consumption, which Keynes called GDP. You can argue that Keynes is no longer dominant, but we still talk about the health of the economy in terms of percentage growth GDP, which is a year-over-year compound growth, which means that 1% per year, which is not very good growth, is actually doubling consumption every 70 years, while 3%, which is considered a moderately healthy economy, is doubling consumption every 35 years. This doubling and redoubling graphs into a power curve headed straight up to the carrying capacity of the Earth, leading to the collapse of the ecosystem starting right about now. This is one of like a million graphs I have that just quantify how fucked we are. But I'm not even going to talk about it because I realized something else the other day which really disturbed me. So right about 1972 is when the US abandoned the metric system. Now, I used to think that the metric system was just a kind of more logical and convenient system, but what I've realized recently is that what it actually is a tool for international scientific communication and collaboration. I think that rich and powerful people saw World 3 as an opportunity to goad nature into killing most of the people on this planet and decided to make that happen. I think that cutting the US off from the scientific world was as much a part of this plan as building giant yachts is today. So it doesn't really surprise me to see people talking out of both sides of their mouths, saying climate change is not real, at the same time as saying climate change is not stoppable. Because it doesn't matter which one you believe as long as you just keep doing nothing, as long as you just remain innocent. We like to think that we're the ones in the matrix, supporting the bastards at the top. But on a global scale, we are the bastards at the top, and the matrix is made from the suffering of other people. Even if you don't care about other people, you should care about this. Because as surely as artificially cheap shipping fuels the internet economy, artificially cheap oil fuels the real economy, and this too shall pass. Then what will we do? We don't know how to do anything anymore. How will we even survive? You probably remember this poster with the famous photo of Gandhi at his spinning wheel. And I understand that Gandhi is a racist weirdo. Just let's talk about something else. I want to talk about what is the meaning of this picture. What is the significance of the spinning wheel? If I may paraphrase Gandhi, if we want to remove ourselves from the matrix, we must take responsibility for our own needs. Or if I might paraphrase Steve Jobs, if we want to be free, we must own the entire supply chain. We don't even know what our needs are, let alone how to meet them, and we have to change that. The economy, like the internet, for us must be opt-in. The closer we can get to that ideal, the better off we'll be when it all falls apart. So now it's time for the good news so we don't all go jump off a bridge. This is not a binary problem. It is, the models, they show very clearly. Once the collapse stops, we can stop it. The longer we wait, the harder it gets, and we don't have forever, but just because we're going down doesn't mean we can't still pull back up. But what I think is the most important thing to realize is that we don't have to choose between trying to stop it or trying to get ready for it. Because the things we have to do to stop it are the same things we have to do to get ready for it. Buy local, produce your own food, generate your own power, manage your own waste, get yourself ready, and then help others get ready. Just like on the airplane, brace yourself and put on your own mask before assisting others. When we disconnect ourselves from the machine stops. I see more and more of this kind of attitude. It seems as if a wave of hopelessness and fatalism is threatening to drown us all. It is so much easier to just give up, to just give in to the despair. But this kind of thinking is a trap. It's just another way of doing nothing, and doing nothing is what got us here in the first place. Doing nothing is what they want, the people who knew this was going to happen and made it happen faster for their own gain. We must fight cynicism as surely as we must fight Nazis. And so I have just one more story for you. I live in Amsterdam, in the Netherlands, and whatever its reputation, it is in fact a quaint little town. It is the kind of place where people still hang posters for their missing pets. I used to call these dead cat posters because I knew in my heart that they're never found. But that was a lie, and it was a dangerous lie, because the truth is, I found that cat. It took 3 days to call the number on the poster, because it took 3 days to admit that it could be true. But eventually, it happened, and his best friend, an old woman who lived alone and who missed him so much, came to pick him up, and they were reunited. He had been missing for more than a month, but now he's home, and I am so grateful. I usually close these talks with a list of things like podcasts that you probably already know, but that you should check out. Today I have only one. If you don't know the work of the great James Baldwin, I really recommend you get to know him. Radio Open Source recently did a story that is a good introduction to his life and works. He is so incredibly relevant today. It's hard to believe he's been gone so long. Thank you.